Okay, I just want to introduce our Fire Marshal, James Gillespie, who is going to answer hopefully as many questions as he can that you have. This is very complicated information, and he tends to talk fast. So raise your hand if you want him to slow down, or ask him to back up a slide or repeat a concept if you need to, because luckily we have the focus group here to do so. So James will go over a lot of the legislation and a lot of the fire mapping and how it relates to our city and some of our homeowner associations and some of our wildland urban interface areas. You'll hear that term WUI. So with that, let me just turn it over to James so you guys have more time with him.
Thank you, Chief. Okay, well, I'm glad we do have a focus group. This is kind of nice. So if you do have questions, I was going to hold them to the end, but I think with this size of group, feel free to launch them. Let's have the discussion. I think it's a better opportunity for that. So like Jeff said, I'm the Fire Marshal for Newport Beach Fire, and I'm involved here, but I'm also involved. I'm an adjunct professor at the college where I teach these classes. I'm a registered state instructor. I'm also the Fire Marshal Section President for the State of California Fire Chiefs Association, so I represent the full legislative committee for fire marshals for the state of California. So I sit in those meetings more than I'd like to, with various representatives from our elected officials to discuss bills, things coming down, things that are going to affect us both locally, so we have a seat at the table. Then also, I run the entire fire marshal section, so all the different things, whether it be battery energy storage systems, wildland urban interface, we're sitting there having these discussions ahead of time and sitting on the code development committees for the California Wildland Urban Interface Code, single exit stairway work groups, fire alarm work groups, you name it, but we're involved and we have a big seat at the table. Ramey, our Deputy Fire Marshal, he is the chair of the Southern California Wildland Urban Interface Committee as well. So we're both active in it, hitting it from all fronts, and that way, again, we can have an opinion when it comes to stuff. I speak, it affords me the possibility to speak directly to our state fire marshal to get information that, hey, is this relevant to us? How does it apply to us? What's the actual intent of this? Versus hearing it third party and down the road. So it's a pretty good opportunity. But as we jump into this, the first thing I want to cover is just some definitions so everyone's on the same page. Local responsibility area, LRA, that's what we are. So the state has an SRA, a state responsibility area. LRA is Newport Beach. That's who's responsible for the suppression and prevention of fire. Who pays the bill if there's a wildfire? So we're LRA. FHSZ, Fire Hazard Severity Zone, that's what the maps are. They're designating the fire hazard severity zones, and that's moderate, high, and very high, with moderate being the least restrictive and very high being the most restrictive. And we'll get into what those actual effects are and the implications, what it means for homeowners, what it means for developers, all that good stuff. If I say SFM, I'm talking about the State Fire Marshal. I'm not talking directly about Daniel Berlant, I'm talking about his office. Generally, if I'm talking in this capacity, it's going to be SFM, that'll be his office. A hazard map, that's what these are. So they depict the likelihood and severity of wildfire based on fuel, topography, weather, and they just identify the hazard. It's actually a tool for government accountability. Let's say that you pay an architect to come design your home, you pay a landscaper to come maintain your home. Well, it's our job to have those areas identified so you can then build the structure appropriately to where you can maintain the defensible space appropriately and account for that. So when we get into what the hazard map triggers, we'll cover that. And a risk map is what you see the insurance companies use. So it's separate. And I could say, based off of my conversations with the insurance industry that I've had from both the insurance commissioner's office and other folks that work in the private insurance side, it is two separate maps. The risk maps are I'd say they're probably far more restrictive and aggressive than what the CAL FIRE maps are, because we have homeowners getting dropped that are well outside of these maps for wildfire issues, outside of the CAL FIRE maps. Defensible space, that's the buffer between your structure and the surrounding area. So when you hear defensible space, it's at 0 to 5 feet, and then 5 to 30 feet, and then 30 to 100 feet. And we'll get into, again, what all those are. Home hardening, the building materials used to resist the intrusion of flames and embers projected by a wildfire. So that's when you hear about upgrading your vents or having a non-combustible roof or double pane windows or non-combustible siding. That's all the home hardening. What's in that building envelope and how do you protect it? Post-2008 construction was built to what we call Chapter 7A of the building code, which is this next definition on there. And Chapter 7A basically said, hey, this is how we design structures that are going to be in a wildfire area that has that hazard to eliminate the ember intrusion, to stop the direct flame impingement, to help defend against a wildfire. The WUI, Wildland Urban Interface, and Wildland Urban Interface Fire Area is what we're calling WUI FA. So we'll get into what those are. So real quick on the legislation and the history of the fire hazard severity zones. Way back in 92, they passed the Bates bill. They call it the Bates bill, but it's Assembly Bill 337. And that basically said that they have to map the fire hazard severity zones in the local responsibility area. They had already previously done it for the state responsibility area, but they'd never done it for the local. So they said they have to map it. So the bill also required CAL FIRE to transmit these recommendations to the local fire department. So in about 2007, they finished the maps. Sometime between 2007 and 2010, they transmitted them. And when they transmitted them, we had the ability to alter the maps. So we had the very high fire hazard severity zone as recommended by CAL FIRE. And then the city had the ability to go, if we disagree, we're going to pull this out, or we're going to add that in, or we're going to change this, or we're going to change that. And if you look at the original map compared to what we actually adopted, it's half the size. But it was an option based off that. So in 2021, Assembly 642, AB 642 was passed. And what that changed is that previously it was just the very high zone in the LRA. They added in the moderate and the high. So the whole time the state responsibility area had all three layers of hazard. And then in 2021, it changed to where we had to add in the moderate and high for LRA. And we talked about cities changing the maps. So SB 63 was passed, and it mandates that the adoption of all three fire hazard severity zones, moderate, high, and very high, within the local responsibility area. So what they didn't want was jurisdictions to repeat it and pull out areas of the maps that they recommended. So they made it to where, hey, it's going to be part of it, and you have to adopt all three zones. So what changed is previously local jurisdictions were only required to adopt the very high, and they said, hey, you have to adopt all three. And then AB 211 occurred. So the current law was that only you had to adopt the very high fire hazard severity zone within 120 days. AB 211 then expanded it to where you had to adopt the high and the moderate within 120 days of them being transmitted to you, and you can't reduce it. So you can't reduce the severity zone that's in there. So if it was in a very high, it can't become high. And if it's in a high, it can't become moderate. And if it's in a moderate, it can't become unzoned. You can only be more restrictive. So if we wanted to add areas in, we could do that, but we can't remove what was recommended. So in this, they said, hey, you have to adopt all this stuff within 120 days, and you really don't have a choice. The public comment period that's required by the bill, we have to have a 30-day public comment period, which it's been on our website with the map with a public comment form. Those public comments are just that. The state is not required to take those comments, nor can we send them to them. They don't have a place for us to send them, nor will they take them. So when people comment on the maps, we take those in and hopefully call and answer questions and educate them on what they are, but we can't modify anything. As a local agency, we can't make it, when people say, hey, we don't want to be in the maps, why was I mapped into it? We don't have that option. So our timeline. So SB 63, 2021, within 30 days of receiving the maps, local jurisdictions must make them available for public review. So on March 24th, we received the maps from the state. On March 25th, they're posted for public review. So I think that's at 55 days as of today that they've been up. And you only have to do it for 30 days. We've allowed it to go much longer than that just to make sure people have the opportunity to see the maps. We're going to close the public comment period on Friday, May 23rd. That's going to be the public comment period closed because at that point in time, we've had nearly 60 days for public comments. If people have questions, the map will still be available. They can call us and ask. We're going to be available to answer any questions people have. We're not going to turn them down. We just won't have the online format to submit a form anymore, but we could still have those discussions. And again, the law does not allow for local agencies to request changes or provide comments to the SFM. So our timeline of events, March 24th, we receive them. March 24th, we post them for public comment. July 8th is when we'll go for the first reading to council with the ordinance, and July 26th is when we'll go, 22nd, excuse me, is when we'll go with the second reading for the ordinance. That's kind of the timeline, how it's looking. So how are the zones determined? I'm gonna tell you what I tell everyone else. CAL FIRE did not show us how the sausage was made. They didn't give us any information. They don't say, this is the formula, this is our modeling, here's the supercomputer, here's the inputs, this is the type of vegetation we use. They just said that they used the best available science and data to develop and field test a model that served as a basis for zone assignments. The model evaluated the probability of the area burning and potential fire behavior in the area, and it took into account fire history, vegetation, flame length, blowing embers, proximity to wildland, terrain, and weather. So that's the information they gave us. So we don't have that model. We didn't get a sneak peek of the maps before they came. When we received them on the 24th, that was the first time we'd seen the maps that we'd been hearing about for 5 years. They're telling us they were coming. So it was the first time we saw them. So it was a big moment for us. Again, the maps evaluate hazard and not risk, and they look at a 50-year period without considering short-term modifications. So let's just say we went and denuded Buck Gully, and it was gone. We cut it all out, and we denuded it, and it was just an open space, but no vegetation. They wouldn't take it out of the map for that. They don't account for those mitigations. So when people say, can we do this to get out of the map? They don't account for it. Now, if we were to build a master plan community potentially in there and pour concrete all over it and eliminate the potential for any vegetation growth, certainly that's a possibility, maybe. But even then, they don't take our opinion on how to evaluate the maps at this point. So we don't have that opportunity. Then again, risk is the potential damage a fire can do to an area under existing conditions, including field reduction projects, defensible space, and ignition-resistant building construction. These are all the programs we talk about, Firewise USA communities, doing your vegetation management, Zone Zero, wildfire prepared home, all those things. So again, it is a hazard map. That's one thing we want to be clear on. That's a hazard map. So how do they impact Newport Beach? So what we have here is a basic diagram of what's applicable. So if you look at the SRA, that's all the state land. Every single requirement that's in legislation and regulations is required for all three areas. In LRA, the very high is the most restrictive, having everything. Adopting the zones is required, SEEK was required. All these things come into place. So we want to look and ask what the map is for, and then specifically look at the LRA, and then see how this map will impact residents in the very high and high. And what I did is I broke down, I think, the top 3 things that will affect residents, because a lot of this stuff's not going to matter to anyone's subdivision review. We're not really building out in Newport Coast anymore, so that's not a consideration. Certain MAP acts, it's not required. Fire safe regulations, those are for when you build a new community, how wide your roads are, how many exits you have, how many fire hydrants you have. That's if you're building new, you account for those things. So it's not really applicable in Newport Coast. So I took like a top 3 for each zone. So the very high zone, defensible space requirements. That's going to be the biggest one. We're going to go into a homeowner and recommending and then enforcing eventually mitigation to their structure. That's going to be a big one. Specifically, Assembly Bill 3074 passed back in 2021, I believe, and that called for the creation of what they call Zone Zero, or an ember-resistant zone. So that's 0 to 5 feet from your structure that's non-combustible. They never ran with it. The Board of Forestry kind of sat on it. So a couple months ago, Governor Newsom released an emergency declaration that said, hey, you have to develop these regulations by the end of the year. So they're working on it now. Ramey and I have sat in all the Board of Forestry meetings, listening to what it is. We still don't know what it's going to look like because there's back and forth between landscape architects, environmentalists, people who are nervous about fires, people who aren't nervous about fires, and where that sits. So they're taking a lot of public comment on it. They've had 3 meetings so far. So we're hoping to get a better draft plea of the regulations soon to see what that looks like. For example, if you have a tree that's within 5 feet of your home, do you have to pull out that tree? Or if it's not overhanging the roof, can you just cut it back and keep the tree there? What size plants can you have? What happens if it's a fire-resistant plant? Could it be something that's native vegetation? Can it be there if it's spaced appropriately? We know for sure that you're not going to be able to have bark mulch. You probably won't be able to have any hedges or bushes underneath windows, and then trees will be cut back. But that's kind of where it's looking right now, but we don't have that clear direction. That'll be required for all new construction starting January 1, 2026 in the very high. It'll then 3 years later be required for existing, meaning retroactively, folks would have to go back and start doing that work. What I see right now is the biggest fulcrum of that is the insurance industry. They're already asking people to do it. And they're asking, we've had one homeowner get asked for 10 feet of non-combustible zone, which some of these areas, you don't have those setbacks to do it. So it's almost setting an impossible goal. But that'd be the big one. Building standards for new construction, designed into Chapter 7A. If you're gonna scrape and rebuild, or if your home had a loss and you're gonna build it again, you'd have to design to Chapter 7A. So just different, similar construction methods, just your vent type, your roof limitations, that sort of thing, your windows, this type that they are, that would have an effect. And then the natural hazard real estate disclosure. That's when you sell your home. For example, if you live off Mesa and there's an airport there, and on Sundays or Saturdays or whenever you can get a lot of traffic, when you sold your home, you disclose that, hey, there's airport traffic and you have noise. Well, this is doing the same thing, but it's saying, I live in a fire hazard severity zone, and these are the mitigations I've done, whether it means you're complying with defensible space, whether you've done any upgrades to your vents, your windows, your siding, anything like that, it gets referenced in there, and that gets disclosed to the buyer. So that'd be a portion of it. And then the high, you lose defensible space. So if you're in the high, You don't have to do defensible space. And based off my conversations with our state fire marshal, it doesn't look like it's coming to the high soon, anytime soon. But you do have to build a 7A, and you still have to do the real estate disclosure. So those would be the big ones that really affect residents. And I really think the very high with the defensible space and zone 0 coming. And there's certain bills that are in place right now that are trying to accelerate zone 0 to make it happen way faster than the 3-year delay for existing. So we'll see where that lands. So we say zone 0, that's the area again within 5 feet of the structure. Non-combustible materials are required that prevent embers from igniting materials that can spread to the structure. Then we go to zone 1, which is 5 to 30 feet out from the structure. And that's where you start limbing up trees, spacing groupings of shrubs, removing dead and dying vegetation. And this doesn't mean get rid of every tree by any stretch of the imagination. Folks always hear that think about that when we say defensible space. It just means cleaning them up and spacing them appropriately to where they're not going to readily transmit fire, convective heat, radiant heat to the structure. And then you go out to 30 to 100 feet. And as you get out that way, it's a little bit less restrictive, but you still get your spacing, you clean up the dead and dying, you mow grasses, and you keep it lean, clean, and green, as we like to say, would be the idea. Now, having said that, it says it's the property owner's responsibility from their structure up to their property line. So that 100 feet, if your yard goes back 25 feet, you're only responsible for that 25 feet. It doesn't go beyond your property line. As a regulatory agency, that's all we would enforce. The insurance industry can ask for different standards that we can't police because they're private. So they may say, hey, we need A, B, and C done. Chapter 7A, again, it's new buildings in the residential zone. It's going to be included in the high January 1, 2026. That's when Chapter 7A will apply there. And that's going to fall into there because California has adopted a new code. So we used to apply the building code, the residential code, the fire code, the California Code of Regulations, the health and safety code, government code, public resource code, all these different items we have to apply from different texts. And what California did is they took it and they go, we're just going to make a wildland urban interface code and put it all in one spot so it's clearer for everyone. The standards are clear because for anyone to come and look at it, whether it be a developer or whether it be a homeowner, you have to look in a lot of different places. And it'd be weird if you knew where to find it if you weren't doing it full time. So this puts it all in one place. So it's going to be housed in one place. So we'll have the California Wildland Urban Interface Code. Once that code comes into play, January 1, 2026, then it's applicable to the high zone as well. When we talk about that California building code and the home hardening, it's your roofs, your vents, your eaves, soffits, cornices, exterior walls, windows, decking, your gutters, your garage doors, all that comes into play. Again, the real estate disclosure, due to Assembly Bill 38, sellers must disclose the properties in a wildfire risk zone, the need for defensible space compliance, and whether a defensible space inspection has been completed or if they're in compliance. All right. Any questions? Sorry.
Is that for existing or new construction? Or
The real estate disclosure is for everybody.
no.
Oh, 7A?
Yeah.
That's new construction. It was not retroactive right now. There's no retroactive requirement that the state's enforcing at this point.
What about the 0 to 5 feet
It's going to be retroactive in 2029
for existing?
for existing homes. They say 2029 because it goes live January 1, 2026. 3 years later, it's going to be active. So 3074 originally had it 1 year later, and then there was another bill that modified that to make it 3 years later. And now there's another bill, I believe it's Senate Bill 629, that's currently going through and has some legs that is looking to modify that a little bit and maybe accelerate zone 0. We have some significant pushback as fire agencies because there's certain triggers in there that make you automatically designate land as a very high fire hazard severity zone. If there's a wildfire, if 10 or more structures are lost, if it's more than 1,000 acres, or if there's one fatality, then we'd automatically have to do it in the very high if it was a vegetation fire or budded wildland. So Newport Beach, we don't have as much as a problem, but there's other cities where they have a lot of homeless encampments in those areas potentially, and they get vegetation fires all the time, and people pass away, and they're like, we'd just be adding this in. So there's some pushback on what those triggers are. There's some other items in there, but those are kind of the big ones with it. It would also make defensible space inspections mandated by every jurisdiction annually. So annually, we'd have to go to your house, do a defensible space inspection, and then we have to report to CAL FIRE through their platform whether it's in compliance or not. So it's a whole thing, but that bill's kind of moving, but we're currently opposed to it right now as a Cal Chiefs group, just because we feel like there's some things missing from it. All right, the presentation of the maps. How many of you guys have actually looked online at them? Have you guys seen them already? Okay, yes, okay, no, okay. This is just kind of a big view of Newport Beach. So this is a big view of it. So you can see we have the red, if you will, is the very high. That orange kind of color is your moderate, and the yellow, is your high, and the yellow is your moderate. So we'll go like a zoom in picture here. This, if you want to see the interactive map and you could turn on the old map to overlay and see where it's at, you can scan that QR code and get to that. But it's available online again. But I have an image of it here. That was the original adopted map from CAL FIRE, the black hash line. The new map is all the red and the gold. So you could see where it expanded significantly. So if we go by the numbers, we currently have 2,825 parcels in the very high fire hazard severity zone. Now in the new map, there's 6,238 parcels total, 831 in the moderate, 1,160 in the high, and 4,247 in the very high. It's an increase of about 3,413 parcels in total, but in our very high zone that would be most affected by this, it's an increase of 1,422 parcels. All right, this is the fun part. So we currently have these things called hazard reduction zones, right? So do any of you guys live in this particular area? So this is off of Morning Canyon or Milford, Lower Buck Gully and Morning Canyon area. Okay, so there's 93 parcels in there. They were already they're designated as a hazard reduction zone. It was a weird thing that cities kind of did at that time when there wasn't a lot of direction, but they didn't want to include them in the map. So these parcels already have a defensible space standard as a hazard reduction zone standard. But what we don't want to do, and it's 93 parcels total, what we don't want to do is add them into the state maps. We want to just keep the state maps the way they are. So what we're going to do is we're going to adopt the state maps as an ordinance as is, and then we're going to do a separate ordinance that makes a wildland urban interface fire area. That wildland urban interface fire area would take all the homes that are in the very high that we already have, and it would add in those 93 parcels of hazard reduction. So all that would change for the hazard reduction owners is if they scrape and rebuild, they would then have to build to Chapter 7A. They already meet a defensible space standard, so we're not changing that. They're already required to do that. We're just adding in if there's a scrape and rebuild, it'd go to 7A. And our old field modeling shows that there is potential in here for loss. And when I get into it for our new field modeling, there is the potential, and they're talking to the gentleman doing it all. He goes, it could be a 5 to 10 home loss, and one's too many for me, so 5 to 10 is significant. So we wanted to add this area in. So to add 93 in, and then what it will also do is the state has the maps, they just cross through parcels. So they didn't pull it up to the property line, they didn't pull it up to a sidewalk, they didn't clean it up at all. They just said, here's your maps, you figure it out. If you want to change the map, adjust parcel lines, we then have to go to the state to do that. With this WUI fire area, what we're going to do is we're just going to clean it up. If the very high is running through your parcel, we're going to treat it like we do flood maps. In the flood maps, if you have any portion of a flood map that's more restrictive running through your parcel, the more restrictive applies. That's what every jurisdiction in California does. That's what we're going to continue doing. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to clean it up. So if it's running halfway through very high, if you're very high and high, it's just going to pull it into the WUI fire area and just clean up the parcel so it's clear for homeowners. Just that way it removes the ambiguity. It would apply anyway, this just paints a prettier picture so that way that there's no consternation of it in the long term. And this again does not adjust the state map, it's just a local map. So it's the same things would apply, it wouldn't make anything different. It's the only ones that would be affected would be the 93 parcels down in Lower Buck and down in Morning Canyon, and that would just be if they scrape and rebuild, Chapter 7A would apply. Besides that, they're doing the same thing they've been doing. All right, some current projects. This is the one you were talking about outside, Kathy. Buck Gully, as you can see, I added from the last time you presented on this that CEQA is out for RFP. So right now we're going through the request for proposal process and doing it for our CEQA consultation. And hopefully what we're getting is a letter saying CEQA is not required. But we have to get that letter for the grant. The grant requires it. Governor Newsom did release an emergency declaration as well back in February, March, that said for any fire hazard reduction zone projects, defensible space that are within 100 feet of a structure, you don't have to do CEQA. But because this grant has to go to the state, their criteria for a grant requires you to do CEQA anyway. So we're going through the process, and it's tough going through. It's a slow process. We're moving as fast as we can. We have and it's not like it's Ramey and I doing it. We have our actual fiscal manager, our finance manager for fire that's running with this because he does it. He did it for years for Public Works. He knows the system, so he's posting it all appropriately. And once we get that, then we can start going and putting shovels on the dirt, getting out there and removing things. That's the ultimate goal. As much as you want it done, believe me. However long this process takes, after we get that done, if they show that we don't need anything, then we can start running. And we can start getting all the contract money, getting the public education stuff. We have the ability to do it. We just have to get through this process before the state gives us the green light. And we work through OCFA for that. They're our state rep, so we have to work through OCFA's group to do that. So it's not like us going direct with the state.
You're not expediting anything after the LA fires?
No. Believe me, when that came out saying that there was going to be no CEQA required, I called Scott Hatch with OCFA. First thing I said, hey, is this a get out of jail free card? Can we run with this? And he goes, nope, can't do it. Here's why it's required. Yeah, so we can't. Additionally, council did approve other work for our Parks and Rec group to do with the Irvine Ranch Conservancy and in partnership to remove out invasives, replant some cactus patches, and get some dead and dying out of there. That's going to be a longer term picture. We're focused on near home fire threat for radiant heat and convective heat, and we want to get that cleaned up. The good thing is once we go through with this grant, it's not like we cleaned it up and we're walking away and we'll figure it out again in 5 years. Our Public Works team has committed to maintaining that area in perpetuity once the work's done. So with the grant, the idea is we do the big lift, get all the ugly stuff out of there, make it nice, and then we maintain it that way so it never gets back to that situation again. So the intent is long-term. We don't want it to be just a Band-Aid. The other big one we're working on that I talked about earlier was the fuel modeling. We're doing fuel modeling, but we're also doing fire pathway modeling. So what does that look like for the community long-term and where we can spend taxpayer dollars to actually have defined tangible benefits to you? Because Chief Boyles can go out there and go, hey, I've done this for 30 years and I think the fire will go there. But there's an emotional, subjective stance to that. We want to remove that subjectivity of it and get the science behind it and see where those threats lie, and then focus our education on those communities that are most threatened, and then focus money from taxpayers to go and do the vegetation treatment plans that truly reduces their risk. So with this modeling, we get the full vegetation treatment recommendations as well to go through and do that work. And as we do it, we can account for that. The long-term goal is to hopefully show as we do that, to present that to the insurance industry and say, hey, this is the work we're doing for our homeowners. We need to get them insurance, and here's how we've reduced their risk. So it's a good program. I'm currently working with the Cal Chiefs and the Moore Foundation. This Thursday, we will host the first WUI pilot community program, and I have one community in Newport Beach. I'm trying to shop to it, and they're taking 20 communities from the state of California and paying for some retroactive work to be done on homes, all these things, and then they're actually going to take them and shop them to the insurance industry to get them better insurance, to get them affordable insurance. So the idea is if we can do this with 20 communities and show the benefit and bring the insurance community to the table, then can we extend that further out for the rest of the state? So we're really trying to focus on that and have those impacts. Programs for homeowners. This is one that I wanted to throw in here just to show what's out there. One of the big ones is the FireWise USA. Currently, I think the closest one to it is Council Member Robin Grant. Her community is this close. They've given us their reports. We've given them feedback to submit it, but you get 8 community members and you can become a FireWise USA community. And how many, do you guys have an HOA that you pay money to monthly for your vegetation management and everything else? You should be getting credit for that. You can get credit for that with this program. If you're already spending the money, it's showing the work you're doing and getting credit. And this is something that insurance companies recognize. And personally, I don't want to say they recognize it and they get you a discount, because I think at this point in time, a lot of people don't care about the discount. They just want insurance, and good insurance at that. But this gives you that potential to shop and at least shows that your community is engaged in moving forward. For individual homeowners, wildfire prepared home, this is what you can do with that parcel level mitigation. We have homeowners that have already been approached by their insurance and said, we will insure you if you get this designation. Otherwise, we're not. And they didn't do it and they got dropped. They're doing it now, and the insurance company said, yeah, you get it, we'll bring you back. So they're actually going to sign them. IBHS runs this program, and they're actually paid for by the insurance industry, but the folks that run it are 40-year CAL FIRE folks. They're 40-year veterans of the fire service. They're scientists, they're foresters, and they built an incredible program. I think on June 13th, they're going to be doing a full presentation, a live burn between 2 homes in Anaheim, one that's built to the 7A standard with Zone 0 and one that's not. And they're going to cast embers on it, and they're going to show the difference in how these structures burn. So we'll be going to that in Anaheim. Safer from wildfires. I throw this one in there because this is from the California Department of Insurance. These requirements for safer from wildfires that say, hey, insurance, if insurance companies insure you, they have to recognize these mitigations. And again, I won't say anything great about discounts for it because I know I got my insurance renewal and the discount for vents was $1.98 a year, which, okay, I just want insurance. So it's strange how it works. But this, if you're doing this safer from wildfires and getting that recognition, you're checking the same exact boxes as this.
What vents did you put in?
My home's built to 7A, so I just got credit for it. It's already built to that with the right vents. It was in 2018, so.
Vanguard, Vulcan?
Honestly, I don't know what ones are on there. Yeah, last time I went on my roof, I fell and I broke both my arms at the same time. So I don't go up there anymore. Chief Boyles gets a kick out of that every time I share that story, but it's a true story. Anyway, so this safe, you get credit. If you're doing this stuff for all 3 of these programs, you can get credit for it and get that insurance and reduce your risk. Ultimately, a home's a big asset. You want to protect it, right? You want to protect it. This is reducing that risk. Is it 100% foolproof? Absolutely not. If you get a Palisades type fire where that wind's blowing at 80 miles an hour and you have those embers getting in your attics, homes are burning down, the structures are now the fire problem and not the wildfire, you can have some significant issues. But these are programs we like to recommend. Ramey and I go out and talk to homeowners, to communities, to recommend these programs all the time. We have a couple folks that are in the process of doing it. I know I have 3 that are trying to do this IBHS wildfire prepared home right now. And we have at least 3 communities that are working towards their FireWise USA designation, which would be great. I think it'd be a great thing to have more communities doing that. And again, you don't have to have everyone in your neighborhood do it. You just need 8. So if you have 20 other homeowners that go, we're not going to do that. As long as you have your 8, you can do it. And you get the actual certificate and placard and everything else to present to your insurance. So it's pretty cool. All right. I'm going to wrap it up there. Leave you guys at 4:44. Leave 15 minutes for questions. This is our fire prevention contact info. If you have questions, want to schedule anything, you can reach out to here, and we can get Ramey out there, we can get myself out there, Michael out there to do whatever you need. But in this, we offer free home assessments. So if you have concerns about what that risk is, we will go out and talk to you about it and look for opportunities to kind of reduce that risk, talk about current recommendations, what's coming down the pipeline, and really try to reduce that risk in the community. I could say that from Chief Boyles' perspective, we are trying to look at the long term as we make these decisions to where we don't want to pay interest down the road for taking out a loan on a bad decision now. We want to make the right decision even if sometimes it's difficult. That way later we have a strong foundation set up for resilience in our community. Wildfire does make us nervous. We don't want that. I can say I know Chief Boyles is more passionate than anyone about this community. I know Ramey's very passionate about it, and I know it is number one to me to make sure our residents are safe. So believe us, this is tip of the spear for us, and we're trying to do everything we can to reduce that risk. It's just we can't do everything overnight, but we're trying to do as much as we can now, build that foundation so the longevity of it exists.